What's up, guys? All right, so for the second time, I am on the podcast. I did this a little earlier, but the video got messed up, so I had to redo it. So here we are. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe. It really helps, brings traffic to the channel. Again, we're trying to grow and get the message out there. So please go hit like, go hit subscribe. Please share the video, and I appreciate it. Now, what I want to talk about today, a couple different things. Joe Biden had a visit to Poland last week and basically went there to talk with other NATO officials about the ongoing situation in Ukraine. He had some interesting comments, 3 different ones that actually stand out quite a bit. The first one, he's talking to a room, I believe is the 82nd Airborne, I think it is, bunch of soldiers, and I want to say he was talking about the Ukrainians, like how resilient they are, and you know, talking them up, and tells our soldiers, you'll see when you get there. Great. Really? What do you mean you'll see when you get there? Are we just sending soldiers to Ukraine now? Like, that's the one thing. Didn't Putin say, hey, don't directly interfere, otherwise there's going to be consequences? Isn't this what most Americans are saying? Like, we don't want to directly get involved with this conflict. We're okay with sending the help, with sending the money, with sending the weapons, but to start sending soldiers is a whole different story. So that was gaffe number 1. Gaffe number 2. Here's where it starts to get dangerous. Biden makes a comment that Putin doesn't need to be in power anymore. Now, some people are going to say, well, Michael, he's just saying what everyone else is thinking. The President of the United States doesn't get the luxury to start saying certain things along those lines. It needs to be a little more calculated. If I say Putin needs to be taken out, Putin needs to be assassinated, Putin needs to be whatever, overrun, that's one thing. I'm a nobody. But you're talking about Joe Biden is now the most powerful man in the world. He holds the most powerful position in the world. To start saying that we need a regime change in the second most powerful country is a direct threat to Russia's sovereignty as a nation. I want you to flip the script. Do you think, look, as much as I talk bad about Joe Biden, I would be absolutely furious and threatened if Putin started saying that we need to have a regime change here in the United States. You haven't ever heard him say it. I've listened to multiple Putin interviews in the last 10 years, going back to, when he first came in office in 2000. He's never once said that. There are certain things you just don't say. And it's even worse when your own administration has to go back and try and fix this statement that you made because of how dangerous it could be. If the Russian people want to overthrow Putin, fine. But to sit there and make statements like he doesn't need to be in power after you've spent the last 3 weeks calling him a war criminal, after you spent your entire election calling him a killer, you obviously don't like the guy. That's fine. He's an asshole. We know this. He's doing some fucked up shit. But to go over there in an official meeting in front of the world and say there needs to be a regime change, and people are going to say, he didn't say regime change. He said, Putin doesn't need to be in power. He needs to be taken out of power. It's the same thing. The White House says, we don't have any plans for regime change. That's not what he meant. That is exactly what he meant. I think the White House came back and said something along the lines of, Biden meant that Putin shouldn't be allowed to exercise power over other countries. No, that's not what he said. And look, we know he doesn't know what the hell he's saying. He's freaking dementia ridden. But we know this. But still, we can't have that kind of representation in a matter like this. We're talking about something pretty serious. We're trying to avoid direct conflict with the second most powerful country in the world and the largest nuclear power in the world. And he's talking about overthrowing the guy. Imagine a foreign country trying to interfere, and people are going to say, well, they interfered in the 2016 election or 2020. No, not even close. Not even close to the same thing. Not even close. Because now he is openly saying that he supports a regime change, and we have sanctions that are backing it up, that are basically, crushing the Russian economy right now and really pissing the Russian citizens off. And it looks like almost like you're trying to cause a rebellion. And you're really pushing this issue. How long will it be before it's taken as a direct threat to Russia's sovereignty? Which brings me to my second point. And I'm going to play this. But Biden also said, he was asked about the sanctions on Russia. And I believe the question was probably something along the lines of, do you think that these sanctions were a good deterrent, or have they not worked as a deterrent like you would have liked them? Something along those lines. And Biden says those sanctions were never meant to be a deterrent. What? Let me go ahead and play it for you guys so you can watch it. And you can see what I'm talking about.
No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. It has to show. This is going to take time.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter, and in order for them to work to deter, they have to be set up in a way where if Putin moves, then the costs are imposed.
But if you believe Putin has made up his mind, what leverage do you really have? Why not put those sanctions in place now?
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. The deterrence effect of these sanctions is still a meaningful one, especially because, remember also, we still sincerely hope that there is a diplomatic path out of this moment.
The purpose of the sanctions, in the first instance, is to try to deter Russia from going to war. As soon as you trigger them, that deterrent is gone. And until the last minute, as long as we can try to bring a deterrent effect to this, we're going to try to do that.
Our hope is that Putin will decide to de-escalate, that he will feel the threat of the sanctions, what the impact will be on the Russian economy, on the Russian people, on the people who surround him. They are meant to have a deterrent impact, that he will feel the weight of being a pariah in the global community. The way we look at this, broadly speaking, and Dilip touched on this a little bit, is that we do see them as having a deterrent impact, right? It doesn't mean
Well, there you go. It doesn't get any more contradictory than that. And I'm surprised they didn't have Joe Biden himself on that video. That's from the Washington Post, by the way. I'm surprised they didn't have Joe Biden himself on that video saying that they were going to be used as a deterrent. Remember, we started threatening sanctions on Russia long before Russia actually invaded Ukraine. Now, I thought the right move was what the Biden administration did, was holding off on the sanctions until an actual invasion occurred. Why? Because you didn't want those sanctions to be thrown back on the United States as the cause for any possible conflict, which is exactly what would have happened. But the threat of the sanctions was still a deterrent. Here's the thing. The sanctions aren't going to stop a war. Russia's going to find the money to fund the war. But the idea is maybe if you're threatening the sanctions on Russia's economy and it was going to hurt the actual Russian citizens, that maybe that would get Putin thinking, is this conflict worth it? Obviously, it didn't work. But to say that it wasn't a deterrent is false. And if it's not a deterrent, then what the fuck are we doing? Because my gas prices are what, $4.20 I think I played today? $4.20 a gallon? In 2019, I don't use 2020. Going back to 2019, I was paying about $2.10. It's my biggest expense for work. I've had over 100% increase in gas expense alone. See, people think inflation is just the 7.8%, whatever this consumer price index is. No, inflation is different per person. You have personal inflation too. My personal inflation rate, because I'm a 1099 and I deduct all my business expenses, probably about 70% in cost. That's what inflation really is here in the United States right now. Most of that goes back to gas and food. So why are we sanctioning a country in oil and blaming Putin oil prices when that's a lie? Because I was paying $3.30 in December, again, 2 months before this invasion, actually almost 3 months before this invasion happened. Gas was going up long before that. These are the Biden prices, not the Putin prices. All the invasion did was maybe accelerated a little bit faster to where it was going to end up anyway. But if the sanctions weren't a deterrent, then why are we imposing sanctions? If they can still fund a war no matter what, if they can, if it wasn't a deterrent and they're going to go to war no matter what, so we're just going to hurt the Russian people. Now I get, okay, we're going to sanction the oligarchs. And hopefully that causes pressure on Putin to stop the war. Okay? Just sanction the oligarchs. Why are we sanctioning trade and impacting, if it is impacting at all, the economy here in the United States? Why fuck ourselves for something that isn't going to fuck Russia any worse than us? It makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. Am I for the sanctions? Yeah. But don't sit there and lie to me and say they weren't for a deterrent. They are for a deterrent. Obviously, they're not working. Just say they don't work. Just say they haven't worked. You were wrong. When's the last time you heard a politician admit they were wrong at anything? Now, we're human. We're all wrong. All the time we make bad decisions, and we're wrong about a lot of things. I'm wrong all the time I'm on the show. And yet, we've never heard a politician say that they're wrong. We never heard a president say that he was wrong. How does that work out? It doesn't. It's impossible. Just say you're wrong, admit to the mistake, and you probably get a lot more approval from the people of the United States. It's as simple as that. Now, what are some scenarios moving forwards with this? I want to lay one out. What if Ukraine gets everything they want, except for the NATO membership? Let's say Putin just gets fed up with the invasion, says, I'm tired of Russian soldiers getting killed. You know, I don't want this political fallout that I'm already experiencing. The Russian economy is going to shit. So we're just going to pull out as long as Ukraine remains neutral, doesn't join NATO. We're going to let them have the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. That's fine. And they get everything. Do we lift the sanctions? No. The reason I say no is because our president and his administration has just doubled down on a regime change. Biden has spent all of his campaign talking about how Putin's a killer. Going back to this, I've already said this. And talking about how he's a war criminal. So you obviously don't lift the sanctions unless you get what you want and get Putin out of power. Because you can't just lift them if there's a ceasefire or peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia. You can't just lift the sanctions and go back to the status quo because you obviously aren't okay with the status quo. What are you doing then? You're just going to forget about the thousands of people? The thousands of civilians? You know, the 300 people in the theater that were bombed and killed? How many men, women, and children, innocent, in Ukraine that were killed by Putin? We just forget about it, lift the sanctions, and go back to our happy-go-lucky world? No. And I say that because just because a Ukraine ceasefire with Russia may be agreed upon does not mean that the U.S. and Russian tensions are going to take a dive too. No, they're going to keep going up. The sanctions are going to stay on Russia until Putin's out of power. I guarantee it. Biden, again, this is why you don't go out and make public statements like he's making, because now you fucked yourself. There will be no foreseeable relations with the Russian, with Russia at all, in the United States or any NATO country for that matter, moving forwards as long as Putin is in power. And then the next person that takes over for Putin, the United States or NATO is going to have to make sure that it's someone that they want in power, which means they will have to interfere with Russia's sovereignty and their way of electing, whatever that process may be, of replacing Putin. That's what it's going to come down to. the U.S. will have to get involved. We always do. And it's not going to end well. I think that, because you also have to remember, we still have 3 more years of a Biden presidency. So we have 3 more years before we even have a change. If we have a change. I imagine we will, but just saying. Now, the next scenario. Let's say Russia gets what they want, but Ukraine as well. Russia gets to keep their 2 independent regions, the Donetsk, Luhansk regions, and Ukraine doesn't join NATO. But the Ukrainian government is still intact. Zelensky's still president. And they negotiate a ceasefire. What are we looking at then? Here's what I think. I think we still have the sanctions on Russia because Putin's still in power. And then in 2014, we saw this civil war between the, Ukraine and these Russian-backed separatists. I think it flips. I think you'll see the United States and Ukraine backing separatists in these Donetsk, Luhansk regions and fighting against Russian military because the Russian military will have to stay in these regions to retain power. The conflict's not going to go away. It's just going to be a civil war in that region. Because you have people in that region right now that are civilians that are staying behind and that are fighting against the Russians. So what, is Putin just going to go and eliminate all of them? If there's a ceasefire, all the people that fled to Poland, now I'm not talking about the ones that fled to Russia that were for the Russian side. I'm talking about the ones that fled out of these cities to Poland that are going to be coming back, going home, and they're not going to like being in that area. So these are things you got to think of. Why am I saying this? Because I don't see tensions, regardless if there's a war in Ukraine. Because of where we're at now, the tensions between Russia and the United States are going to keep rising. It's inevitable. Because, again, going back to the United States has now come out publicly and said that they want a change in power. And that's not a good look. That's not a good thing to just say. You can think it all you want. Everyone's thinking about it. Everyone probably agrees with it. But you can't go out and say it. Because you kind of lose all of your leverage when negotiating from here on out. Because now, if we just lift the sanctions and we go back to what we were, after Biden just said all of this, we've called him a war criminal. Putin just killed however many thousands of people, and he's talking about regime change, and we don't do it. People are going to look at Biden and say, what are you doing? You're just going to let Putin get away with all of this stuff that he did? And politically, that's not what the Democratic Party wants. Because don't think for a second. Look, I've said this before. The Democrats, I believe, and when I say Democrats because they're just the ones in control right now, but our elected officials, when we were negotiating with Russia leading up until this invasion, inflation was already skyrocketing. Gas prices were already up 70, 80% from what it was from 2019. Again, I don't count 2020. From 2019, already up 70 or 80%. Don't think for a second that the politicians didn't sit back and say, okay, if Russia doesn't invade Ukraine because we get to negotiate certain terms to them, great. We save a lot of lives. Okay. But if they do invade Ukraine, that's okay too, because now we can flip the script. We can say these are Putin's gas prices. The sanctions we're hammering on Russia are the cause of the inflation, the cause of food shortages in the United States, the cause of high gas prices, and we're going to blame it on him. And that's exactly what's happening. I've been saying this for the last 2 months. And then I want to go back to these food prices. Biden also came out and said, look, be expecting a food shortage. Let me tell you something. The United States has some of those, if not the most fertile ground in the world. We can literally feed the whole fucking world. There's no reason at all for the United States to have a food shortage of any kind. The only reason the United States will have a food shortage is because of bad political policy. That's it. It has nothing to do with Russia. It has nothing to do with China. It's bad political policy. Policies going back to NAFTA that impact farming. Okay, we have crushed our agricultural communities. We have done things that have disincentivized or made it expensive or difficult for farmers to farm. We could literally feed the world. And now we're talking about food shortages? I don't buy it. And you're going to sit here and blame the food shortages on Putin? I've been seeing shelves having, empty shelves since well before the invasion. Again, this was all going on before any sanctions were imposed on Russia. The second to last thing I want to talk about. This was interesting. I saw a poll. It's from Quinnipiac University. Now, I don't know what Quinnipiac University is, but they did this poll. It's a very interesting poll. And what the question was is, if the United States was invaded like Ukraine, we were in the same situation they were in. Now, you know that Zelensky mandated every man between the ages of 18 and 60 that they had to stay behind and fight. And you see a lot of these civilians, women too, and children that are staying behind. They're mass producing Molotov cocktails. They're doing all kinds of things to help out with this effort. And it's working out for them. Ukraine is doing extremely well against the Russians. But they asked Americans if they would do the same thing, if they would stay behind and fight, if we were invaded. Here's the results. It says, as the world witnesses what is happening in Ukraine, Americans were asked what they would do if they were in the same position as Ukraine are now. Would they stay and fight, or would they leave the country? A majority, 55%, a slim majority, said that they would stay and fight, while 38% say that they would leave the country. When they break it down by political affiliation, Republicans, 68% of Republicans said that they would stay and fight, 25% said that they would flee. Independents, 57% said that they would stay and fight, 36% said that they would flee. Democrats, 52% of Democrats said that they would stay and fight, 40% said that they would flee. Now, this also says that nearly half of the Americans, 49%, say the attack on Ukraine has contributed to them feeling anxious, while 50% of them say it's not. Okay. There was another one, though, that talked about the ages. And basically what it said was that the younger generation, I believe is between the ages of 18 and 34, when they asked them if they would stay and fight or if they would flee, the majority of them said that they would flee. Now, that's important because 18 to 34 is fighting age. Now, this is my generation. I'm not proud of this. I'm 29. I'm right in the middle of that age. I will fucking die here before I flee this country because someone is invading. I wish someone invades here just so they can find out. I will not leave here before defending this country. Absolutely not. Here's the other thing. Where are you going to go? See, you got to remember, if the United States gets invaded by a foreign country, the logistics behind that is just remarkable for them to get over here. No one has a military in this entire world for them to get over here, which means that it would have to come out of Canada or Mexico, which means shit has already hit the fan long before that invasion happened. But how can anyone say that they don't want to defend their country? And now they said that the reason behind this was because of America's flawed history. Fuck that. Every country has a flawed history. Every single one of them. Every one of them. Look at the British Empire. It's the largest empire to ever live on the face of this earth. They own like a sixth of the world right now. You're going to tell me they weren't imperialists and going around and taking shit over? Of course they did. They probably killed more people than anyone. Any empire, I don't care if you're from Africa, you're black, or if you're from the Middle East, or the Romans, whoever, they all have a flawed history. They all have a history of slavery. They all have a history with oppression. They all have a history with genocide. In fact, the United States, as far as genocide is concerned, is the only one I think I can think of off the top of my head that may not, as far as genocide is concerned. And other people will argue that, but I think that's not true. Where are you going to go? Where do you go? If the United States was invaded, where do you go? You go nowhere. Because this is the last foothold on the earth as it stands. Now, in years to come, that may change, and I hope it doesn't, but that's how it is right now. And everyone should want to stay here and fight for this country. Here's the thing. As flawed as you think our history may be, damn if, people aren't willing to break the law to get in here for a better life. You don't see 250,000 people from all different countries trying to get in here illegally every month to go to any other country. I don't see people going to Brazil, 250,000 people a month illegally migrating to Brazil or Canada or Australia or China. No, they're coming here to live the American dream. And it's worth fighting for. And that poll is shocking. I thought maybe we'd get like a 70% and 80%. And then the people that weren't willing to fight were too old to fight. Or they're handicapped or something like that. But 55%, and the majority of them are young, fighting-age people? That's crazy. That's scary. The good thing is we have enough guns and we have enough people that would want to fight and that have experience fighting that we wouldn't need them anyway. But it's still scary. The thing I'm going to end on here, and I've gone through this quick and I'm glad, is the Will Smith thing. I don't watch the Oscars. I care about the Oscars. It does not make a difference in my life. But it was fake. And if you think it was real, you're crazy. Here's the thing. No one cares about the Oscars. No one's even watching the Oscars. They're losing popularity every single year because they do that woke-ass bullshit they always want to do. So how do you get ratings up? Okay, we're going to go stage some extreme event about some stupid joke that wasn't even bad. I mean, Jada Smith fucks every guy that walks. They have an open relationship. There's so many ways that Chris Rock could have made a joke about them, and he said something about G.I. Jane and her hair, and that's what he gets mad about? Second of all, why do you go up there and slap him? And that slap was a weird slap. He's like backing away when he slaps him. If you're really pissed, you go through his ass. But now everyone's going on watching it. They got exactly what they wanted, and that was viewership. And the viewership is coming from people going back and watching this incident. And they are making the money from the advertising revenue on YouTube and all these clips of Will Smith going up there and hitting Chris Rock. It was so staged. And if you think it wasn't, I think you're crazy. But again, look, I'm going to end on that. We'll be back on tomorrow, 6 Central. Again, had to go back through here, redo the video, and the content that I put out earlier. But don't forget to subscribe. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening.